we have to have connections with other people. And you alluded to validation, being understood. I love this saying. The most comforting words in the world are me too, me too. That moment that you realize and recognize that your story is somebody else's story, and that you don't have to explain yourself, but you feel in your heart that somebody understands what you're saying.
Awekenge, this is Mental Matters, hosted by Asegototo.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Mental Matters. I'm your host, Asegototo, and before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
Andrew, you've been in this field, in terms of this field of mental health. You have been an advocate of mental health for the last 25 years. So what actually firstly what made you drew you into this field of mental health, being a mental health advocate, and why it is so important for us to actually try to notice actually there is this gap within mental health, and we need to actually raise more awareness about.
Yeah, thank you for asking. What originally got me interested in the cause of mental health and to try to be helpful in the lives of other people came as a result of somebody being helpful in my life. The short story is I had a difficult and sad parts of my childhood, and when I was 15 years old, after dinner, my mother said that she wanted to go shopping, and we ended up in a therapist parking lot. I grew up in the North Shore of Chicago, and I can remember looking around thinking, this is not the way to Northbrook Court. What's going on? I remember my mother crying. I remember that she was in pain, but I didn't know why. And I think I was kind of so wrapped up in my own head and my own pain and being self-centered that I didn't for a second consider how I was living my life was affecting the people around me. And so I remember thinking after that first therapy session with this man, Rick Tivers, I had the thought, the only thing this guy does for a job is try to help other people. How cool is that? And then I remember thinking, if I make it out of childhood, because I was not sure I would, if I make it out of childhood, I'd like to look into being helpful to other people. And so that's where it all started. Childhood filled with depression and the short and long-term effects of sexual abuse and growing up in a dysfunctional family. Because of all of that, I guess I chose the path of trying to help myself and then try to help other people.
And you spoke up in terms of growing up in a dysfunctional family and try by any means to help yourself and help to other people. And it's something that myself, I would say that being raised by a single parent and in terms of not just single parent, a single mother, and actually try by any means to myself to actually not being peer pressured by other people and seeing my peers actually do these things. And as our initial conversation around addiction and not trying to actually take on drugs, not take on alcohol, is quite hard. And that thing of trying to actually being told that you will be like your father, you will be like your mother, and when it comes to these substances abuse, what actually makes a person say that they will choose their different path, and why is it so essential to a person to prove themselves through helping other people when it comes to such conversations?
Giant question. I don't know that I have the single answer as to why somebody who has experienced a difficult childhood chooses to kind of champion the cause or tries to be helpful to other people. I just know that for me, I used to be teased for being really sensitive. I've always been a sensitive person. And for me, I'm sure there's a connection between my own experiences and my sensitivity to the world around me and other people that are in pain. It almost, I don't actually feel qualified to do anything else in my life. I've never wanted to do anything else. That's, I don't know if I've ever said that before, but it feels right in saying it now at 55 years old. I didn't pursue anything else.
And
I think my plate was full. I was trying to accomplish two things: stay alive, don't kill myself, and then have a future of some kind. I don't know that I had much room for for other things.
And I actually relate with you because I myself, someone that actually in a way of trying by any means to having that mentality that I will get out where I came from to the environment that I grew up in, where there were so many influences that actually led me, actually pointed at doing substance abuse, of having substance abuse, but instead of going that way, I went that way, and being always focusing on that thing. I have not actually looking at other things. I hear you. And at some point in my life, I wanted to actually validate myself. When I entered a new environment, I wanted to actually do so many things that people would say that, oh, flip, that guy works out. And being able to prove ourselves. And it goes back to self-esteem, having that low self-esteem of saying that, always having that inner voice of saying that you're not worth it, you're not going to make it. And you keep on pushing yourself over and over and over again. And being teased, and also something that I actually also experienced. So, to our conversation, addiction. Addiction, addiction is something that we can't run away from. It exists. It exists, and people look at it in a different perspective. There are so many types of addiction. So, through your work and through your practice and through you having there's 25 years of experience as a mental health advocate, what has been the most cause of a person going through addiction?
Yeah, I suppose that is the first question that certainly people who love and care about somebody who is they suspect of struggling with an addiction. That's the $1,000,000 question: why addiction? And I think that there are There are basic answers to that, and that they're a combination of looking for something on the outside to quiet or fix the inside, curiosity and experimentation, social influence, peer pressure, underlying mental health issues, genetic predisposition, having certain behaviors in our family modeled to us. Kids are growing up in a household. Kids they're sponges, and they take in all the stimuli that is around them. And if every day, as an example, mom or dad comes home, they seem to be in a bad mood, their face is showing a bad mood or angry, they go to the refrigerator, they take out a beer, that is being locked into a child's memory bank of how to be in the world. I'm certainly not blaming parents. I'm saying that there is both a genetic predisposition and each child's socialization, availability and accessibility, life changes, stress, an attempt to regulate emotions, and a combination of all of them put together. I think most of us can identify with, why did I like opiates and alcohol in particular? Well, simply, I liked the way that I felt better when I was intoxicated on opiates and alcohol better than when I wasn't. I guess on a very simple level, I liked the way I feel, or actually a finer point, I liked not feeling. For me, I didn't know this at the time, but it's how I think about it now. I wanted to find a way to stop the world and get off for a little while, and then be in control of when I came back, because I had so little control in a lot of areas of my life. And so I just think it was a very powerful position I created for myself. And if I'm powerful, then I'm less vulnerable. And if I'm less vulnerable, I reduce the risk of being harmed. And I think that was the goal, is to keep myself protected from harm.
I feel like, also to add what you've said, it's something that we actually eventually try to do. And that's why, whereas we end up going to drugs, when going to alcohol, going to different types of addiction. And just something that you spoke about, you said that I like the way I feel. And again, speaking about human connection, I read somewhere where it says that when a stranger comes in contact with a stranger and they being vulnerable with each other, and they share the same sentiments, whereas some would say that in terms of speaking about their traumatic events, and that's where the true connection comes in. And I believe that it goes back to, again, to alcohol and or drugs or any types of addiction. Wherever I actually try to take the drug, I will have the same feeling as the feeling that I have actually being vulnerable with someone, and I would actually justify it in a way of, actually I'm being seen here, I am being heard. And one of the reasons why I believe that if their feelings can be validated, if people can always be seen whenever they voice their views or opinions, I believe that mental health problems would reduce, because that's the main problem. Because if I say something towards you and you shut me down, I will start in a way of start in terms of doubting myself and asking myself, why am I here? And going back, all of this goes back to suicide, and how the correlation of depression and substance abuse and suicide actually interlink. I believe that before you go to suicide, you are bound to cross path with addiction, and when addiction is not enough, you will definitely go to it. You will definitely go to suicide.
Yeah, for sure. I mean um, that's how it was for me. I think addiction and self-destructive behaviors, as I think most people think of them, um, I look at addiction as suicide prevention. It's certainly not
Mm,
healthy, but at least in my case, it was better than the alternative.
mm,
And
mm,
so
mm,
I think that we are wired to survive at any cost. And for me, it was the cost of, well, almost everything. Um, and back to your point about what is it about connection um, that makes, uh, you didn't really say this, but how I heard you, um,
mm,
that we have to have connections with other people.
mm,
Um, uh, and so, and you alluded to validation, being understood. I love this saying. Um, the most comforting words in the world are "me too." Me
mm,
too. The moment that you realize and recognize that your story is somebody else's story, and um, that you don't have to explain yourself, but you feel in your heart that somebody understands what you're saying. Um, I don't know that there's a more connecting experience than that.
mm,
And I think, I don't know, speaking for myself, I know for sure that that's what I was looking for. I was looking to not continue to think that I was the only one in the world that had these giant secrets that nobody could possibly understand. And I was becoming more and more invisible. I felt, or I suppose I feared, that as time went on and I wasn't talking, and my loneliness grew, um, and shame grew, um, I kind of feel like I was disappearing.
mm, 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 mm.
And honestly, I don't know if that was the goal or if that was a consequence. I don't know if I was trying to disappear and not be seen, or if it was just a natural result of hiding for decades.
Mm,
All I
mm,
know is
mm.
that when I stopped hiding and um, began to take some risks and speak to other people, the quality of my life got better.
Mm. And I, speaking still on the conversation of addiction and suicide, it's something that I've seen. And on topping that, speaking what you spoke about, where is isolation, being alone, and actually not, let me not say being alone, being lonely. And it ends up actually introduce your thoughts when you are within your thoughts, and you have someone that it's afraid of your thoughts. You actually inhabit new things. what I mean by that, new addictions, new habits. And definitely we can't talk about addiction without talking about habits, because habits, that's where you actually end up having a certain addiction, because you had a habit thinking that it's just a small thing. As you kept doing it, kept doing it, and it ended up being addiction. And overlasting addiction, and an everlasting habit. Whereas in a way of not realizing that, as I mentioned earlier, that one would actually not realize that it's an addiction until in, in, in a way of they are in a form of in denial of actually not realizing, of flip, I'm suffering. And also it's not actually easy to say that I need help. Those and something that I keep on saying, that I keep on actually seeing on social media, is that I something what one of the things that men are afraid to say is the fact that I need help. And help in a way of that I need to get off these drugs, I need to get off alcohol, I need to get off this porn addiction, I need to get off this and this and this and this. And being afraid of people telling you that you are weak, that you have an addiction of porn, you have addiction of alcohol, you have addiction of drugs. And before this actually initial conversation, I was, my research. I usually listen to a particular people, and I was listening to Jonathan Harry, and he spoke in his TEDx talk. He spoke about that human connection and people in terms of rehabilitated in terms of medication. He actually spoke uh, more on the side of human connection, and he also brought up the study that was done in something that was done back in Portugal, whereas when people that has had in a way of addictions, especially drugs, most of the time in the South American side, there are people that actually more deal with drugs. And what the government would do is the fact that instead of actually locking them up, they would actually try to find jobs. A person that has a business would actually be funded by the government. The government would ask an entrepreneur to actually hire the addicts. Then instead of the entrepreneur actually paying the salary, the government will cover it. And that's how they saw, oh, flip, we can change this. And instead of looking exactly at that, the certain thing of an addict needs to actually rehabilitate through the prison system and stay there to until they actually see their wrongdoings, but not actually realizing that, oh, flip, we can just do it the easier way. And again, on top of that, he added the study where it comes to the mouse the mouse theory, whereas they lock a mouse in a cage, and they pour in a way of substance in the water and wait for a bit of time, and the mouse will end up actually drinking the water. In a way of, it shows that whenever we are confined in a space of in a small space, on top of in terms of being lonely, being isolated, we eventually will go back to, for example, if we had an addiction, we'll go back to that addiction. So it's something that I just wanted to bring up. Do you have anything to add on that?
Um, I'm a little confused on what the specific question is.
In terms of, do you have anything to add on what I just said, in terms of your thoughts on what I just said, in terms of, in terms of the theory when it comes to the mice in the caged mice?
That's a pretty famous study, and if I'm thinking of the right one, it ultimately showed that given the choice between, I think, was it cocaine in the water or heroin in the
Yeah,
water?
I think it was cocaine. It was cocaine.
Given the choice between cocaine in the water and interacting with other mice, when they were alone, they gravitated towards drinking the water and became, I suppose, addicted to the cocaine. But as soon as they introduced other mice, the mice would prefer to socialize and be with other
Mm.
mice, if that's the same.
Yeah, I think it's the same. It's the same study.
Yeah. So, um, I mean, my thought is that that's exactly kind of how I feel about why the social model of recovery
Mm.
is the biggest, most well-known, most studied, and most funded type um, of recovery.
Mm.
Is the socialization aspect. We're just not designed to be alone.
Definitely. One of the things that, in terms of, I try by any means to actually research on, being able to actually learn from, is that the fact that whenever we are alone, we become these species that actually end up doing things that we don't want to, don't want to do. And speaking on the conversation of vagus nerve system, to someone that might actually be confused, what is vagus nerve system, and how is it connected to addiction?
Yeah. So this is the vagus nerve, and um, I only became interested in this a few years ago. Although looking back on it, I think um, I have been struggling with um, not being able to, in a healthy way, regulate my nervous system. And as I mentioned before, uh, on a simple level, addiction occurs as a result of engaging in a maladaptive behavior and taking something from the outside in into the inside of us to make the inside feel better. And most of us have heard that the answer to our problems is not outside of us, but inside of us. And what I ultimately was looking to do, and millions of people I think are trying to do, um, is to regulate our nervous system. And this vagus nerve uh, runs down the sides of our necks, all the way down our body, and it regulates our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight, freeze or fawn um, reaction. And um, um, I'm pausing because earlier in our conversation, I was talking about what I was really looking for was an opportunity to have some control in my life, to stop the world, get off for a little while, and then put myself back together, and then come back to reality. I don't have to stop the world anymore. I just needed to learn more about my nervous system, and ideally try to help teach other people about their nervous system. For me, it's very simple now. I am aware of what the signs of kind of impending stress, what it looks like and what it feels like for me. And I take the insight that I have into myself, and instead of doing something unhealthy, um, like reaching for a bag of Doritos or a, you know, a drink, whatever it might be, um, I go to the freezer and I grab an ice pack, and I sit down and I hold the ice pack on either side of my neck, and I close my eyes, and I count to 50, and I feel like it's a superpower. It's not, but I think it is. I can bring myself from a very high level of distress to a very manageable baseline level of calm in about a minute. And that is because of figuring out how to regulate my nervous system. And the vagus nerve, it impacts our breathing, our digestion. It is our reflexive actions. It regulates our heart rate. It's one of the longest nerves in our body. It's part of the autonomic nervous system. And it is crucial in regulating not only our internal systems and structure, but it manages our breathing and our reactiveness in the world to stress around us. And we don't need permission from other people. It doesn't cost anything to help ourselves. We have access to it 24 hours a day. I think that's why I think it's brilliantly simple. And it doesn't require us to be dependent on anybody but ourselves. Like I have the tools inside of me to help the inside of me whenever I need.
And it kept speaking in terms of helping ourselves, and it took me back to a quote, something that was said by Dr. Jordan Peterson on a podcast, when he spoke about, if you're gonna tell people that here are 3 ways or 5 ways to actually get rid of what you're going through, people won't listen to it. But when it comes to here are some tips of ruining your life, people will genuinely listen to. And as I listened to you in terms of explaining the vagus nerve system and how it can assist us, how is it that can we actually make people or pursue people when it comes to actually helping themselves, and not in terms of trying by any means not to always go to going to that one thing that they will go and they will need to come back over and over again? How do we actually make them see that in some way you can help yourself without actually going to a professional, without actually spending a lot of money?
Yeah, you ask good, complicated questions. I would say, again, just in my experience, the first thing I needed to do was, I guess, acknowledge that there was a problem and answer a fundamental question: do I feel deserving of peace and calm and quiet and serenity in my life? Do I deserve that? People, for example, I used to wake up a long time ago, and every day was kind of like Groundhog Day, and it was kind of the same. I'd go through the motions, but I didn't think kindly of myself, and used to think things like unlovable, fat, unworthy, stupid, really negative, harmful things I would think about myself. That person that I used to be does not generally do kind things for themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does actually. It
And
does.
so we would agree that going to the gym or going for a walk or a run is a very healthy thing to do. But you know who you don't often see at the gym and going for a walk and doing healthy things for themselves? People who think they're pieces of shit.
Mm.
And so it's a great intervention, self-care, but I think we have to, that's the power of relationships. I think that's where we have to really understand where each person is at first before we start making recommendations on what they should do.
Mm.
And I think it's a bit arrogant for us to think that any of us know what other people should do. I'd rather be inquisitive and ask questions of other people and have them determine what's best for them than for me to determine that. It's going to mean a lot more, anyways, if they come up with it. So I guess the bottom line for me is I needed to move out the old perception of myself, the old self-esteem, which was zero. And when that got better, that's when I became more inquisitive and wanted to learn about regulating my own nervous system and go to graduate school and do my own therapy before I go and try to do therapy with someone else. And it's been a really long journey.
And I love the fact that you mentioned that you started to work on yourself. It's something that, again, it's something that myself have wanted to start doing, and when it comes to helping people, and you just can't help people would actually not help yourself, and it's something that we generally, in a way of not start doing, because we think that through helping other people, we eventually help ourselves by default. Whereas there are some things that one needs actually need to deal with. For example, if you have a certain trauma and you start helping people, and you never know that a person might actually say something towards you and or a client, and you become triggered and you'll be seen as unprofessional. And it's something that I saw on myself, whereas I myself that will some traumatic events in my life, and so you know what, let me talk about it, let me do this podcast, let me create awareness around mental health. And as I as years went, I realized, oh flip, I still have to deal with some things, and decided, you know what, as much as I love talking about people like you and raise such awareness around these conversations, I started working on myself. Started to actually be nice to myself and being actually grateful for things that I've come across, being positive, towards life, and that really changed a huge perspective to when it comes to healing. And one of the thing and one of the things that people don't get is the fact that self-love it's hard. It's not something that you tell yourself that no, I'm gonna love myself today and I will gonna love myself every single day and I'll be consistent towards it. And again, like I always say this, but I always say this. I definitely the audience will actually get tired of it. Whereas I remember back in when was it? I think to 20, back in 2021, and I made a pledge to myself of saying, "Ah, no, I'm lying." 2020, I made a pledge to myself of saying that I will work on myself, and mind you, not realizing what it actually means to work on yourself. And when I started it and saying that I love myself, and in order for me to actually do that, I needed to actually eliminate everything in my life in a way of not being in relationships, not having friendships, not actually having in terms of reaching out to people. And it was hard as much as it worked. And it worked. Fast forward this year, I read a book. Actually, I was listening to an audio book by Jonathan Harry, where he speaks about the 9 causes of depression. And one of the causes was this disconnection from people. And we keep on saying that I need to do this alone. I need to do this alone, not realizing that once we actually get in that loop of doing things alone, we eventually sideline other people. We become disconnected, as you said that you wanted to shut the world off and come back come back as in control. And I believe it's something that we do, but without the relationships that we actually created, without in terms of friendships and relationships, we are not true to ourselves. We are, when we come back, no one will wait for us. The time waits for no one. One thing that I'm quite sure, time waits for no one. So as much as you want to work on yourself, but be honest with people that are close to you and saying that you're going through this, and I might be out for a couple of days, and don't be scared, don't be surprised when you don't hear from me. And probably you might be surprised how also they suffer the same things that you're going through. And it's a perception that we keep on having, we as humans, when it comes to such conversation around addiction, when it comes to around depression and mental health problems. Yeah, I just needed to actually to say that.
out loud. Yeah.
Yeah, I just needed to say that. And still on the conversation, I believe that it's a perfect time to actually dive deeply on the six F's to heal our trauma. Firstly, what are the 6 F's?
You have the ability to. Can we pause this for a second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like literally pause.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So whether it's I'm pulling from one list or another list, there's 6 F's, and sometimes over the years I've identified more F's, but I think for I hope that it's accurate to say, I think that for most of us who've experienced a trauma, there are a set of there's kind of a predictable path if we are truly seeking a way from kind of through it, not around it or over it or under it, but if to heal. And most of us will get stuck at one of these stages, and I think it's important to kind of push through. One of the F's is to flesh it out, or to identify what is it that I'm actually dealing with here. It's a bit of a quest. I think it's also important to focus on, which I guess would be another F, on there's so many experiences that we each have that could be categorized as traumatic. Which one do we want to work on? I think for the most part, what makes the idea of dealing with trauma so difficult is because it feels too big, and that we won't survive it. And if we take on everything that's caused us pain in our life at one time, it's overwhelming. And so fleshing it out, focusing on one aspect of it, being willing and able to feel the feelings that come up as a result of being on this journey and trying to heal. Another F would be to befriend. It gets complicated because it doesn't necessarily mean to befriend ourself. I have learned kind of a lot in 25 years about therapy, and there's a therapy model called IFS, and it stands for internal family systems. And it kind of flips our normal way of thinking about uncomfortable things on its head. For example, my addiction, that thing that I and everyone around me wanted to extinguish or get rid of because it was going to kill me. There's another way to look at my addiction, and that was something that I was using to protect myself. And so when it comes to one of the F's being befriend, I think part of it is to befriend that part of ourselves that we are frightened of. And that could be our anger, our resentment, reality, that there are going to be things that that we need to develop a different understanding or relationship with. Fear kind of weaves its way is another F. Fear weaves its way in and out through this. And I think fear is the most important F because it is actually the short and the long-term consequence of all trauma is the fear that the trauma produced in us. If I talk about it, I'm afraid of it. If I don't talk about it, I'm afraid. If I'm reminded of it, I'm afraid. On some level, anything that I do can potentially become a fearful experience if it's related to the trauma. And that's where focus comes in dealing with, I guess, dealing with ourselves is I think for me a better way of saying it than dealing with our trauma. Is developing a new relationship with myself and the parts of myself that I have either cut off or despised or am embarrassed by, or that remind me of humiliation. It's being willing to focus on bits and pieces at a time, and not being afraid. And if when I do find myself afraid, just acknowledging the fear. Like somebody once said, have your feelings and do it anyways. So that phrase has helped me over the years, that I can be afraid of something and do the next right thing at the same time.
And fear plays a huge role when it comes to self-esteem and actually stopping you from doing things. And again, it's something that I've shown myself and so on to other people. And the only difference that is, it goes back to something that Alex Hamosi was saying on Chris Williamson's podcast, Modern Wisdom, where he said that people might say that they are afraid of doing that, and he asks them, and that end is very important, because you are saying that you are afraid of this. What are you planning to do about that? Are you planning on sitting down and always be afraid of that thing, or just moving forward and do it anyway? And it's something that myself did, and try not to think about it too much. Just do it. Like, as much as this line is cliche, but just do it. And just do it is that is so important. It's so much important and powerful. Once you keep on telling yourself that I'm able to do it, you will eventually do it. And again, it goes back to something that, who this lady, I forgot her name, but she was on a podcast, and when she said that you should every morning wake up and look at a mirror and say that you love yourself, and you're gonna conquer the day. And eventually that brings up I would say positive mindset towards yourself, and you realize that isn't harder than you thought, and fear is just a word. So I'm quite seeing that actually the time we're almost out of time. Before I let you go, what is the biggest lesson that you want the audience to learn from our conversation today?
Well, I think that you said it. You said it best, and I'm thankful. You were just now talking about what this woman had said on the show, and or somebody said, and I remember a mentor and a therapist of mine who's no longer with us. I remember maybe 25 years ago, I said to him, I said, Fred, I'm depressed. And Fred said, so what? And I remember at first feeling wounded by that. But then I remembered that Fred cared about me, which made it easier for me to take in what Fred was wanting me to pay attention to. And I think it's exactly what you said in regards to and. Like, now what? Now what? We use these declarative statements. I'm depressed. I'm afraid. I can't. And then we put a period there. And then I guess wonder, why is my life not going anywhere? Well, because we have stopped our pursuit. We have stopped moving forward. And if there's anything, it's certainly a reminder for myself, anybody else who's trying to forge a path through life, and is to not argue for our own limitations. And what I mean by that is, if I wake up in the morning and I say, I'm depressed, and I do nothing, I really shouldn't expect that day's going to go very well. And then that tells me that, well, maybe the quality of my life has more to do with me than I thought, and that I can influence the course of my life and my day. And that I do have some power and mastery and control in my life. And maybe the only thing that's wrong with me is the way that I think about me.
And is that internal voice of actually trying to control the internal voice, and people would actually run away from those internal dialogues. And as much as there are different types of internal dialogues, there is positive and negative. As much as we want to listen to that positive one, eventually we might listen to both of them, but our choice will be definitely go to the negative one, because we believe what we tell ourselves, which is negative instead of the positive ones. So, Andrew, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate
My
your
pleasure.
expertise, and really enjoy the conversation. And when it comes to addiction, when it comes to in terms of the 6 Fs, when it comes to vagus nerve system, and something that people might actually be in terms of being surprised in how actually affects our in terms of behaviors, because again, addiction goes with behaviors and also with those habits that I kept referencing it. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate your insights. And yeah, man, I thank you so much for being here again. Really appreciate it. Andrew.